There is no magic in the sword. There never was. Excalibur didn't choose Arthur because he was brave or noble or destined for greatness. It chose him because of something far stranger, something that has nothing to do with virtue and everything to do with the kind of person most of us quietly are. And the moment you understand what that actually means, the story stops being a fairy tale and starts being a warning. Let's go back to where the story actually comes from, because most people think they know it. A sword, a stone, a boy who becomes a king. But that version, the clean, cinematic version, is not the original. The earliest written references to Arthur appear in a 9th century Welsh manuscript called the Historia Brittonum. Arthur in that text is not a king, he is a war leader, a dux bellorum, a general hired to hold a crumbling post-Roman Britain together against Saxon invasion. There is no sword in the stone, there is no Camelot, there is barely even a name, just a man doing an impossible job that nobody else would take. The sword in the stone appears much later, in a 12th century French romance by a poet named Robert de Boron. And here is what almost nobody notices about that version. The sword was not a reward, it was a test. And the test was not measuring strength. The inscription on the stone, in the original text, reads, "Whoso pulleth out this sword of this stone, an anvil is rightwise born king of all England." Rightwise, not strongest, not bravest, not most deserving, rightwise. A word that meant something closer to correct, as in the right fit, the right shape, the right person for the specific weight of what comes next. Here is the part the story never tells you. Every single man who tried to pull that sword and failed went home. They returned to their villages, their families, their ordinary lives. They were embarrassed maybe, humiliated possibly, but they were fine. They ate dinner that night, they slept. The sword was not their problem anymore. Arthur pulled it out, and the sword became his problem forever. The moment it moved, everything he would ever do for the rest of his life was no longer his own. His time was not his. His choices were not his. His body was not his. He belonged to the sword now, and the sword belonged to everyone who needed a king. Most of the men who tried and failed were luckier than they knew. Psychologists who study leadership emergence, the specific phenomenon of why certain people end up carrying responsibility that others avoid, have identified something consistent. It is not dominance. The dominant person in any group is almost never the one who ends up carrying the weight long term. Dominance is loud, expensive, and exhausting to maintain. What actually predicts leadership emergence is something quieter and considerably more uncomfortable. It is a near-complete inability to walk away from an unsolved problem. They gave this a clinical name. It sits inside a broader framework of what researchers call heightened responsibility sensitivity. The technical language is not important. What it means is this. Most people, when they encounter a problem that is not theirs, perform a fast unconscious calculation. Is this my problem? No. Good. And they move on. People with heightened responsibility sensitivity cannot do this calculation cleanly. They see the unsolved problem, and something in them treats it as already theirs. Not because they want it, because they cannot stop seeing it. The sword does not move for the person who wants power. It moves for the person who physically cannot leave the problem in the stone. And this is where the story becomes something darker than a legend. Because that trait, the one that pulled the sword, is not a gift. Ask anyone who has it. It is a compulsion dressed in the language of virtue. The person who always steps up, always takes on more, always finds themselves holding the thing everyone else put down, is not doing it from nobility. They are doing it because not doing it creates a specific kind of internal pain that is very difficult to explain to someone who doesn't feel it. Psychologists have documented that individuals with high responsibility sensitivity report significantly elevated rates of chronic stress, decision fatigue, and burnout, not because they are weak, but because they are constitutionally unable to choose rest over obligation when obligation is visible. Arthur did not rule Camelot because it was glorious. The original texts, the ones before the Romance writers got to them, are full of a king who cannot sleep, who sends his best people into dangers he chose for them, who watches everything he built slowly fracture from the inside. He pulls the sword at 15 and spends the rest of his life paying for it. The story doesn't end with a throne, it ends at Avalon, which is a poetic way of saying it ends with a body that finally had permission to stop. Now think about the person who couldn't pull it. The knight who trained his whole life, who was stronger than Arthur, faster, more experienced, who wrapped his hands around that hilt and felt nothing move. He walked away. He probably thought he had failed. He had not failed. He had been spared. His life was still his. His back would not carry a kingdom. His nights would not be full of the weight of other people's survival. He would grow old making choices for himself, answering to himself. The sword didn't reject him. It protected him. So here is the question you have been sitting with since the first sentence, without quite knowing it. Which one are you? Because the sword is not a medieval object. It is a structure that appears in every life, in every generation, wearing completely different costumes. It is the problem at work that everyone is pretending not to see. It is the family situation that has been quietly deteriorating while everyone waits for someone else to deal with it. It is the thing in your own life that you keep picking up and putting down and picking back up again because you cannot seem to leave it alone. Some people walk past these things without a second thought, and some people feel the pull before they even touch it. The story was never really about a sword. It was about a question that humanity has been unable to stop asking since the first time one person stepped forward while everyone else stepped back. What is the cost of being the one who can? Not what is the reward. What is the cost? Because the reward is visible. Everyone can see the crown. What they cannot see is what Arthur knew from the moment the sword moved, that some things once lifted can never be put down again. And the only way to find out which kind of person you are is to stand in front of the stone and notice what you feel. Most people feel nothing, and they go home, and they are fine. The ones who feel the pull already know. They have always known. They have been feeling it their entire life. In every room they have ever walked into, in every problem they have ever been unable to leave alone. The sword did not choose Arthur. Arthur was simply the first person who could not walk away. And whether that is a gift or a sentence depends entirely on what you do with the weight once it is in your hands.